The machines fell from the sky without warning, and humanity never saw them coming. But the most terrifying question isn't how they arrived, it's whether we built them ourselves. Welcome back to All About the Lore. Today we're diving deep into one of gaming's most compelling mysteries, the origin of the Aark in Ark Raiders. These mechanical terrors have driven humanity underground, transformed the surface world into a deadly war zone, and left survivors questioning everything they thought they knew about their own history. To understand where the Aark came from, we need to journey back through decades of catastrophe, survival, and the choices that shaped this broken world. Ark Raiders presents us with a future Earth that bears little resemblance to the planet we know today. Set in the northern regions of Italy, the game drops players into a landscape scarred by environmental collapse, mechanical invasion, and humanity's desperate struggle for survival. But this world didn't become a nightmare overnight. The story of the ARC is intrinsically tied to the story of humanity's greatest triumph and its most devastating failure. It's a tale that spans generations, weaving together themes of inequality, abandonment, technological hubris, and the consequences of leaving problems behind instead of solving them. The machines that now reign from the heavens weren't always there, and the world they invaded was already broken long before their arrival. The game's setting is deliberately rich with environmental storytelling, offering players glimpses into a civilization that once thrived before everything fell apart. Rusted infrastructure, abandoned settlements, and the remnants of advanced technology paint a picture of a society that had reached impressive heights before plummeting into darkness. Understanding this history is crucial to unraveling the mystery of the Aarki, because every clue about their origin is embedded in the context of what came before and what happened during humanity's darkest hours. Before we can understand the machines, we need to understand the world they invaded. The Italy of Ark Raiders wasn't always a frozen wasteland, dotted with underground cities and mechanical terrors. There was a time, not so long ago in the game's timeline, when this region represented the pinnacle of human achievement. Advanced cities stretched across the landscape, connected by sophisticated infrastructure. Technology had progressed to levels that seem almost fantastical, with humanity reaching beyond Earth's atmosphere in ways that suggested a bright future among the stars. This was a world of abundance, at least for some, where scientific advancement had unlocked possibilities previous generations could only dream about. The northern Italian region that serves as the game's primary setting was particularly developed. Cities had grown vertically and horizontally, sprawling across the terrain with architectural marvels that blended function and form. Transportation networks connected urban centers with remarkable efficiency. Manufacturing capabilities had reached impressive scales, producing everything from consumer goods to the components necessary for space exploration. The population enjoyed standards of living that reflected decades of technological progress and economic growth. Education, healthcare, and entertainment had all evolved to incorporate cutting-edge innovations. For those living in these metropolitan areas, life was comfortable, predictable, and full of promise. Space technology represented the crown jewel of this civilization's achievements. Humanity hadn't just sent exploratory missions beyond Earth's atmosphere. They had established genuine infrastructure for sustained space operations. Launch facilities dotted the landscape, their towers reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for the stars. These weren't simple rocket pads, but sophisticated spaceports capable of handling regular traffic to orbital stations and beyond. The technology required for such operations demanded mastery over countless engineering challenges, from propulsion systems to life support to material science. The fact that this civilization could maintain space operations on a regular basis speaks to their industrial capacity and technical expertise. The Acera spaceport stands as perhaps the most significant remnant of this era. Located in the Campania region, this facility represented one of the primary launch sites for humanity's space ambitions. Its infrastructure was built to last, constructed with materials and techniques designed to withstand the tremendous forces involved in launching payloads into orbit. Multiple launch towers allowed for concurrent operations, suggesting a volume of space traffic that went beyond occasional missions. Support facilities surrounding the primary launch pads included fuel production, cargo handling, passenger processing, and all the logistical requirements of a fully operational spaceport. The scale of this operation indicates that space travel had moved beyond the experimental phase into something resembling routine transportation. But this advanced civilization harbored a growing crisis that would eventually tear it apart. Environmental degradation had been accumulating for decades, each generation pushing the problem forward while hoping future technology would provide solutions. Climate change accelerated beyond early predictions, triggering cascading effects across multiple ecological systems. Rising temperatures destabilized weather patterns, making extreme events more frequent and more severe. Coastal regions faced the slow but inexorable encroachment of rising seas. Agricultural zones experienced shifts in growing seasons and viable crop ranges. Water resources became increasingly strained as droughts intensified in some regions, while others faced unprecedented flooding. The warning signs were present for those willing to see them. Scientifics. Reports documented the accelerating changes with increasing alarm. Coastal cities implemented expensive adaptation measures, building seawalls and elevated infrastructure in an attempt to hold back the rising waters. Agricultural regions struggled to maintain productivity as traditional crops failed and new ones proved unreliable. Governments debated policy responses while corporations calculated the costs of meaningful change. Some voices called for radical action to address the root causes of environmental collapse, but the inertia of established systems and the immediate costs of transformation proved too great for coordinated global response. Inequality defined this civilization as much as technological achievement. While some enjoyed the fruits of advanced technology and comfortable urban living, vast populations struggled with limited resources and diminishing opportunities. The gap between wealthy and poor had widened over generations, creating stark divides in quality of life, access to services, and prospects for the future. This disparity wasn't just about comfort, it determined who would have options when catastrophe struck and who would be left to face the consequences. The wealthy accumulated resources and influence, positioning themselves to weather whatever storms might come. The poor, meanwhile, found themselves increasingly vulnerable to disruptions they had no power to prevent or escape. This inequality would prove decisive when environmental crisis transformed into full-scale collapse. Those with resources had been planning for such an eventuality, quietly preparing escape routes that wouldn't be available to the masses. The space infrastructure that seemed to represent humanity's collective future had another purpose for the elite. It offered a way off the dying planet entirely. While the poor were told that space exploration would eventually benefit everyone, the reality was that those with wealth and power were building themselves a separate future, one that didn't include the majority of humanity. The betrayal implicit in this plan would have profound implications for what came after, potentially including the origin of the ARC themselves. Then everything fell apart. The collapse didn't happen overnight, but when it came with devastating speed and totality. Around the year 2180, environmental pressures that had been building for decades reached critical thresholds across multiple systems simultaneously. The result was catastrophic on a scale that dwarfed any natural disaster in recorded history. What followed was a cascade of interconnected disasters that transformed the landscape and destroyed the infrastructure of civilization within a remarkably short period. The world that emerged from the collapse bore little resemblance to what came before. Earthquakes shattered the stability of the region with unprecedented frequency and intensity. Seismic activity that had been relatively manageable suddenly intensified. As tectonic pressures found release, cities built to withstand typical earthquake activity crumbled under forces that exceeded engineering tolerances. Buildings collapsed, killing thousands and rendering vast swaths of urban territory uninhabitable. Transportation networks fractured as bridges fell and tunnels caved in, severing connections between population centers. Underground infrastructure like sewers, subway systems, and utility lines suffered catastrophic damage. The The earthquakes didn't just destroy buildings, they dismantled the connective tissue that allowed civilization to function. Flooding followed the seismic disasters, adding water to the chaos. Rising sea levels accelerated dramatically as polar ice sheets reached tipping points in their melting. Coastal areas that had been slowly adapting to incremental increases suddenly faced surges measured in meters rather than centimeters. Storm surges pushed water far inland, overwhelming defenses that had taken decades to construct. Rivers, swollen by changing precipitation patterns, breached their banks, flooding valleys and plains. Cities that had stood for centuries found themselves inundated, their lower levels submerged beneath water that refused to recede. The flooding didn't just destroy infrastructure, it contaminated freshwater supplies, rendered agricultural land useless, and created breeding grounds for disease. Volcanic activity added fire to the equation. Mount Vesuvius, the famous volcano overlooking the Bay of Naples, erupted with renewed violence after centuries of relative dormancy. Ash clouds darkened the sky, spreading across the region and beyond. Pyroclastic flows scorched the landscape around the volcano, obliterating anything in their path. Lava flows destroyed communities that had existed in the volcano's shadow for generations. The ashfall disrupted agriculture across a vast area, coating crops and soil with material that would take years to weather away. The eruption didn't just cause immediate destruction, it altered the climate of the region for years afterward, dropping temperatures and disrupting weather patterns in ways that compounded the existing environmental crisis. The combined effect of these disasters broke civilizations back. Supply chains collapsed as transportation infrastructure failed. Food production plummeted as agricultural regions flooded or were buried under ash. Energy systems failed without the fuel deliveries and maintenance they required. Communication networks went dark as power failed and physical connections were severed. Medical facilities were overwhelmed and then destroyed. Government authority fragmented as officials either fled or found themselves unable to coordinate response efforts. What had been a functioning society dissolved into isolated pockets of survivors struggling to meet basic needs. The technological sophistication that had seemed to guarantee humanity's future proved worthless without the industrial and logistical systems to support it. Population centers that had housed millions were abandoned as they became uninhabitable. Coastal cities drowned beneath rising waters, their tallest buildings becoming islands in a new sea that showed no signs of retreating. Earthquake-damaged structures posed constant threats of collapse, making remaining in urban areas a deadly gamble. Ash-covered regions struggled with toxic air quality and contaminated water. Survivors fled inland into higher ground, carrying whatever they could save and leaving behind the accumulated achievements of generations. The refugee crisis that resulted overwhelmed any remaining governmental capacity to provide assistance. Refugee camps swelled with desperate populations, many of whom would never see home again. The environmental devastation continued long after the initial disasters. The region's climate had been fundamentally altered, with ash in the atmosphere dropping temperatures and disrupting the seasonal patterns that agriculture depended on. Ecosystems collapsed as species unable to adapt to rapid changes went extinct or abandoned their traditional ranges. Water sources became scarce and often contaminated with ash, industrial pollutants released by destroyed facilities, or seawater intrusion into aquifers. The land itself had been transformed, with new lakes where valleys had been, islands where cities stood, and wastelands where productive land once stretched. But perhaps the most devastating blow to those who survived the collapse wasn't environmental. It was the realization that they had been abandoned. As disaster struck, the wealthy elite who had dominated the pre-collapse society executed their long-prepared escape plan, leaving the majority of humanity to face catastrophe alone. This betrayal, this fundamental severing of the social contract, would echo through everything that followed, shaping not just survivors' immediate struggle for existence, but potentially the very nature of the threat that would later descend from the sky. The Exodus stands as one of the most controversial and consequential events in Ark Raiders history. While earthquakes tore apart cities and floods drowned coastal regions, while ash darkened the sky and millions fled their homes in desperate search of safety, another drama played out at spaceports across the region. The wealthy and powerful elite, those who had accumulated resources and influence during the prosperous years before the collapse, had not been idle in the face of mounting environmental crisis. They had made preparations, investing in technologies and infrastructure that offered a solution available only to themselves, escape from Earth entirely. The space infrastructure that had been presented to the public as humanity's collective future revealed its true purpose during those dark days. Launch facilities like the Asera spaceport, ostensibly built for scientific research and the eventual benefit of all people, became departure points for the privileged few. Massive spacecraft, far larger and more sophisticated than anything publicly acknowledged, waited on launch pads. These vessels weren't exploration ships or research stations. They were colony ships, arks designed to carry populations large enough to establish self-sustaining communities elsewhere. The existence of such ships implied years or even decades of secret preparation, resources diverted from public benefit toward private salvation. The exodus wasn't announced with fanfare or public coordination. There were no lottery systems to determine who might secure passage, no democratic process to decide how humanity's spacefaring capability would be allocated in a time of crisis. Instead, those with sufficient wealth and connections simply left. Launch after launch carried the elite away from the dying world below, their spacecraft climbing through ash-darkened skies toward destinations unknown to those left behind. Some reports suggest orbital stations served as intermediate destinations, while others speak of journeys to the Moon, Mars, or even more distant locations. The exact destinations remain uncertain, lost to the chaos of the collapse and the breakdown in communication that followed. Those who witnessed the launches described scenes of profound betrayal and rage. Crowds gathered outside the security perimeters of spaceports, watching as the privileged descended while they remained trapped on the surface. Some attempted to storm the facilities, desperate to secure passage for themselves or their families, only to be turned away by private security forces. The launches continued methodically, each departure taking another segment of the elite away from the consequences of the environmental crisis they had helped create. The sight of those spacecraft rising toward the stars while disaster engulfed the land below became a defining image of the collapse era, symbolizing the final abandonment of any pretense of social solidarity. The exodus didn't just take people, it took resources, knowledge, and capacity that could have been used to help those remaining on Earth. The industrial capability required to construct colony ships represented a massive investment that could have funded adaptation measures, relocation efforts, or infrastructure to help populations survive the environmental disasters. The technical expertise involved in space operations departed with the elite, taking with it knowledge that might have aided reconstruction efforts. Medical supplies, advanced technology, and stockpiles of resources accumulated for the journey all vanished into the sky, unavailable to the millions struggling to survive on the surface. Asera spaceport saw some of the largest launch operations during the exodus. Its multiple launch towers allowed for concurrent departures, maximizing the number of people and cargo that could be evacuated in the limited time available before environmental conditions made operations impossible. Witnesses described the facility operating around the clock during the final weeks of the collapse, with launches occurring at all hours as the elite rushed to complete their escape. The infrastructure showed signs of hasty preparation. Additional capacity had been added in the years immediately before the collapse, suggesting that the elite had specific intelligence about the timing and severity of coming disasters that they chose not to share with the broader population. The spacecraft themselves represented technological capabilities that surprised many observers. These weren't vessels cobbled together in response to immediate crisis. They were products of long-term development programs that must have begun years or decades earlier. Their size and sophistication indicated sustained investment and engineering efforts on a scale that rivaled or exceeded public space programs. Some featured modular designs that suggested capability for long-duration missions, or even permanent habitation. Others appeared optimized for cargo, carrying equipment and resources necessary to establish industrial capacity elsewhere. The variety of vessel types implied a comprehensive plan for off-world colonization, not merely temporary refuge. The psychological impact of the exodus on those left behind cannot be overstated. Survivors of the collapse faced not only immediate threats to their survival, but also the knowledge that they had been deemed expendable by those with the power to help them. This betrayal fundamentally shaped the culture and worldview of post-collapse humanity. Trust in authority and institutions collapsed alongside the physical infrastructure. Narratives of collective human progress and shared destiny were revealed as convenient fictions masking brutal inequality. The elite's willingness to abandon billions to save themselves demonstrated that wealth and power created not just different life experiences, but fundamentally different moral frameworks and sense of obligation to fellow humans. In the decades that followed, the Exodus became a foundational myth for survivor communities, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy and embellishment. Some accounts portrayed the departed elite in simple terms of villainy and selfishness. Others took on more complex tones, questioning whether anyone in their position would have acted differently, or whether the departed had any real obligation to those they left behind. Still, others saw the Exodus as simply the final chapter in a long history of inequality and betrayal, the logical conclusion of systems that had always prioritized some lives over others. Regardless of interpretation, the Exodus remained a central reference point in understanding post-collapse society and its values. The question of what happened to those who left became a subject of endless speculation among those who remained. Did they successfully establish colonies elsewhere in the solar system? Did they perish in space, their advanced technology ultimately insufficient to overcome the challenges of off-world survival? Did they find paradise on distant worlds while their former neighbors struggled in the ruins of Earth? Or did something else happen to them, something that might connect to the later arrival of the ARC? These questions would take on new significance when machines began falling from the sky decades later, their origin as mysterious as the fate of the departed elite. The immediate aftermath of the Exodus left Earth's surviving population in an even more desperate position. The departure of the elite had taken with it not just people, but crucial technical knowledge and resources. Facilities that had supported space operations fell silent, their purpose fulfilled, and their operators departed. Launch towers stood empty, monuments to abandonment visible for miles around. The industrial capacity that had produced spacecraft and their components fell idle, then into disrepair as maintenance ceased. What had been cutting-edge spaceports became ghost towns, their sophisticated equipment gradually degrading without the experts to maintain them. Survivors who explored these abandoned facilities in later years discovered extensive evidence of the Exodus and its preparation. Supply caches had been systematically emptied, their contents presumably loaded onto departing vessels. Technical documentation remained in some locations, though much had been deliberately destroyed or was too specialized to be useful without expert interpretation. Living quarters showed signs of hasty evacuation, personal belongings abandoned in the rush to depart. Communication logs where they survived revealed the cold efficiency with which the Exodus had been planned and executed, with departure schedules and passenger manifests allocating space with bureaucratic precision. The Asera spaceport became particularly significant to post-Exodus survivors. Unlike some facilities that had been completely abandoned, Asera retained some level of human presence, with survivors settling in and around the complex. The infrastructure, though no longer operational for its original purpose, provided shelter and resources. Buildings constructed to house space operations personnel became homes for refugee families. Warehouses that once stored rocket fuel and spacecraft components were repurposed for more mundane but crucial supplies. The launch towers themselves became landmarks, visible navigation points in a transformed landscape, and potent symbols of the betrayal that defined the collapse era. Some survivors harbored hopes that the departed might return, that the Exodus had been temporary refuge rather than permanent abandonment. They maintained watch on the skies, interpreting every unusual sight as potential evidence of the elite's return. These hopes gradually faded as years passed without any sign of the departed, but they never entirely disappeared. When objects finally did begin falling from the sky decades later, some initially interpreted them as the return of the exiled elite, perhaps coming back to reclaim their world now that environmental conditions had stabilized. This hope proved tragically misplaced. What fell from the sky wasn't human salvation, but mechanical death. The Exodus left complex questions about responsibility and justice. Should survivors spend resources trying to maintain space infrastructure on the chance that communication with the departed might be restored? Should they view the departed as enemies whose betrayal demanded eventual accounting, or simply as a separate population that had made its choices and departed? These questions had no clear answers, but they shaped survivor societies' values and priorities in profound ways. Many communities developed strong egalitarian principles, rejecting the hierarchies and inequalities that had characterized pre-collapse society. Others became more tribal and protective, viewing outsiders with suspicion and hoarding resources against future crises. The Exodus's shadow stretched long across survivor culture. From the ashes of catastrophe, humanity began the slow process of recovery. The period following the collapse and exodus became known as the Age of Sunrise, a name that captured both the darkness from which survivors emerged and their hopes for a brighter future. This era saw scattered populations gradually stabilize their situations, moving beyond mere survival toward something that might be called rebuilding. Communities coalesced around resources, defensible locations, and charismatic leaders. Agriculture resumed on a small scale in areas where soil remained viable and water could be secured. Trade networks began forming between settlements, initially simple barter, but gradually evolving into more sophisticated exchange systems. The Age of Sunrise wasn't easy or comfortable, but it represented genuine progress from the depths of the collapse. Populations stabilized and even grew modestly as children were born into the new world. Technological capability, though vastly reduced from pre-collapse levels, improved through salvage operations and the rediscovery of manufacturing techniques. Knowledge preservation became a priority, with literate survivors documenting what they remembered of the old world and what they learned in the new. Communities developed governance structures appropriate to their circumstances, ranging from councils of elders to more democratic assemblies to strongman rule by whoever could provide security. The environmental situation gradually improved, though the landscape remained fundamentally transformed from its pre-collapse state. Ash settled out of the atmosphere over years, allowing temperatures to stabilize and skies to clear. Volcanic activity subsided to normal levels. The floods receded somewhat as water found new equilibrium levels, revealing changed but partially usable land. Coastal regions remained drowned, creating new geography that survivors learned to navigate. Agricultural productivity increased as soil recovered and survivors identified crops suited to the altered conditions. While the land would never return to its pre-collapse state, it became increasingly capable of supporting human populations. Salvage operations became crucial to rebuilding efforts. The ruins of pre-collapse civilization contained vast quantities of useful materials and equipment. Salvage teams ventured into abandoned cities and industrial sites, retrieving everything from basic tools to sophisticated electronics. Some salvaged materials were used directly in their original form, while others were broken down for raw materials that could be repurposed. The most valuable finds were working equipment, generators, vehicles, medical devices, communication systems that could be restored to operation with sufficient technical knowledge and spare parts. Salvage wasn't without danger, as unstable structures, contaminated sites, and conflicts with other salvage teams created constant risks. Communities began specializing based on their locations and available resources. Coastal settlements developed fishing and maritime capabilities, learning to navigate the transformed geography of the new coastline. Agricultural communities formed in the most productive remaining farmland, their surplus food becoming valuable trade goods. Manufacturing centers emerged in locations with access to salvaged industrial equipment and raw materials. Trading hubs developed at crossroads and navigable river points, facilitating exchange between specialized communities. This economic specialization and trade represented a significant step toward functional society, even if it remained vastly simpler than pre-collapse complexity. Security became a constant concern during the Age of Sunrise. The breakdown of formal government and law enforcement had created power vacuums filled by various actors, not all of them benign. Bandit groups formed around individuals willing to take by force rather than trade or produce. Some communities became aggressive toward neighbors, viewing them as competitors for scarce resources rather than potential trading partners. Defense capabilities determined which settlements survived and which were overrun. Walls, guards, and organized militias became standard features of successful communities. Alliances formed between settlements for mutual defense, creating larger-scale political structures. Technology during this period represented an interesting mix of salvaged advanced equipment and newly developed low-tech solutions. A community might have a working vehicle salvaged from before the collapse, but lack the fuel or parts to maintain it long-term. They might use pre-collapse communication equipment when it worked, but rely on messengers when it didn't. Medical care combined salvaged pharmaceuticals and equipment with traditional remedies and practices. This technological patchwork meant capabilities varied widely between communities and even within single settlements over time, as salvaged equipment failed and couldn't be replaced. Some technical knowledge was lost entirely when the last person who understood particular systems died without successfully passing their knowledge to the next generation. The survivors of the Age of Sunrise developed complex relationships with pre-collapse society and the Exodus. Some communities venerated the technology and achievements of the old world, viewing themselves as preservers of civilization trying to restore what was lost. Others rejected the values and priorities of pre-collapse society, viewing the collapse as divine judgment or natural consequence of wrongful living, and the Exodus as proof of the elite's moral bankruptcy. These differing perspectives influenced everything from technological priorities to social organization to the stories communities told about themselves and their history. The Asera spaceport and other abandoned launch facilities became pilgrimage sites for some, forbidden places for others, reflecting these varied interpretations of history. Children born during the Age of Sunrise knew only the post-collapse world. They heard stories of the old world from parents and elders, tales of cities with millions of people, of technology that seemed magical, of abundance and comfort that sounded like fantasy. These children grew up learning skills appropriate to the world they actually inhabited: farming, salvage, defense, basic manufacturing. For them, the idea of space travel and orbital stations belonged to legend rather than lived experience. This generational shift meant that survivor society was gradually becoming something new rather than simply a diminished version of what came before, with values and priorities suited to their actual circumstances rather than nostalgia for a vanished world. The Age of Sunrise saw the emergence of cultural and artistic expression suited to the post-collapse world. Music, storytelling, visual arts, and other creative pursuits helped survivors process trauma, maintain hope, and create meaning in difficult circumstances. Songs about the collapse and exodus passed stories between generations. Visual artists documented the transformed landscape and the daily life of survivor communities. Storytellers combined remembered history with myth and imagination, creating narratives that explained how the world came to be as it was and offered visions of possible futures. These cultural expressions helped bind communities together and gave them identities beyond mere survival. Trade networks that developed during this period created connections between diverse communities, facilitating not just economic exchange, but also information sharing and cultural diffusion. Traders carried news between settlements, spreading information about distant communities, threats, opportunities, and discoveries. They brought goods, but also ideas, techniques, and perspectives from other regions. Some traders became important figures in their own right, respected and trusted by multiple communities as neutral parties whose business depended on maintaining good relationships with all. The roots and relationships established during the Age of Sunrise would prove important when new threats emerged. As communities stabilized and populations grew, some survivors dared to look beyond mere existence toward ambition and improvement. Plans emerged for major projects, clearing and reclaiming agricultural land, establishing new settlements in promising locations, salvaging major industrial equipment, and moving it to where it could be used. Educational efforts expanded beyond teaching immediate survival skills to preserving academic knowledge and technical expertise. Some communities even began experimenting with restarting industrial production of important goods rather than relying entirely on salvage. The Age of Sunrise earned its name through this return of hope and forward-looking planning. However, stability remained fragile. Communities could be destroyed by crop failures, disease outbreaks, bandit attacks, or leadership failures. Environmental conditions, though improved from the worst of the collapse, remained harsher and less predictable than pre-collapse norms. Resources that seemed abundant could be depleted by overuse or revealed as finite. Conflicts between communities over territory, resources, or ideology could escalate into destructive violence. The Age of Sunrise represented genuine recovery, but survivors remained acutely aware of their vulnerability and the thinness of the margins separating survival from catastrophe. This awareness would prove prescient when humanity faced its next great crisis. The fragile peace of the Age of Sunrise shattered when objects began falling from the sky. Approximately 30 years after the Exodus, survivors across the region reported strange metallic objects descending from above, initially mistaken for meteors or debris. These objects crashed into the landscape with tremendous force, creating impact craters and sending shockwaves across the terrain. Curious and cautious, survivors approached these crash sites to investigate, expecting to find natural phenomena or perhaps remnants of pre-collapse satellites decaying from orbit. What they discovered instead would plunge humanity into a new nightmare that made the collapse seem almost merciful by comparison. The objects weren't meteors or debris, they were machines. Mechanical constructs of obviously manufactured origin, these devices bore no markings, identification, or clear purpose. They varied in size from relatively small units, comparable to large animals, to massive structures that dwarfed anything survivors had constructed since the collapse. Their design aesthetic was simultaneously familiar and alien. They clearly represented advanced technology with sophisticated materials and engineering, yet their specific configuration and purpose remained mysterious. Some lay dormant at crash sites, their systems apparently damaged or powered down. Others activated shortly after landing, revealing capabilities that terrified the witnesses. The active machines began moving with unsettling purpose. They weren't exploring randomly or exhibiting the confusion one might expect from damaged equipment. They acted with apparent coordination and intent. The machines spread out from crash sites, moving across the landscape in patterns that suggested systematic surveying or searching. When they encountered human settlements or survivors, the results were catastrophic. The machines attacked with overwhelming force, utilizing weapons that ranged from physical strikes to energy-based systems that defied easy explanation. Communities that had survived the collapse and rebuilt during the Age of Sunrise were destroyed in hours or days by machines that seemed unstoppable. Survivors who witnessed these early attacks described scenes of absolute horror. The machines moved with speed and efficiency that organic defenders couldn't match. Conventional weapons proved largely ineffective against their armor and construction. The machines showed no interest in communication, negotiation, or any interaction beyond destruction. They targeted infrastructure as well as people, systematically demolishing buildings, destroying crops, and dismantling anything of value. The pattern of destruction suggested the machines weren't simply hostile, but were actively working to eliminate human presence from the areas they occupied. Communities that tried to resist were overwhelmed. Those that fled survived but lost everything they had built. This initial onslaught became known retrospectively as the First Wave, though survivors experiencing it had no way of knowing it was merely the beginning. The machines that fell during this period, while deadly, showed certain limitations. They appeared somewhat crude in their operation, compared to what would come later. Their targeting systems were effective, but not perfect. Their mobility, while superior to human defenders, could be outmaneuvered with sufficient desperation and knowledge of terrain. Most significantly, they could be damaged and even destroyed with sufficient firepower and tactical coordination. These first-wave machines were built for overwhelming force rather than sophisticated operation, suggesting their creators either lacked certain capabilities or prioritized rapid deployment over refinement. The composition and construction of first-wave machines provided crucial information, though it would take time for survivors to fully analyze and understand what they were facing. The materials used in the machine's construction were sophisticated but recognizable, primarily various metals and ceramics that could have been produced by advanced human manufacturing. Electronic systems recovered from destroyed machines showed design principles consistent with human technology, though pushed to extremes of miniaturization and efficiency. Most tellingly, the machines ran on power systems that appeared to be fusion-based, technology humanity had achieved but never fully industrialized. These characteristics suggested the machines were built by a civilization with technology comparable to or slightly beyond pre-collapse human capabilities. Humanity's response to the first wave evolved through several phases. Initial encounters resulted in panic and flight, with survivors abandoning settlements and fleeing to remoter areas. However, flight proved inadequate when machines continued falling across the region, making nowhere truly safe. Desperation forced organization. Survivors began coordinating defense efforts, sharing information about machine vulnerabilities and effective tactics. Weapons were gathered from pre-collapse armories and salvaged from military installations. Former soldiers and security personnel took leadership roles, training civilian fighters in combat basics. Communities that had operated independently during the Age of Sunrise began forming alliances of necessity against the common threat. Fighting the machines required adapting to their capabilities and exploiting their weaknesses. Survivors learned that concentrated fire on specific components could disable machines more effectively than spreading damage across their armored shells. Ambush tactics using terrain for cover proved more successful than direct confrontation. Explosives, particularly improvised devices using salvaged materials, could damage or destroy machines when deployed cleverly. The machine's apparent programming showed patterns that could be exploited. They responded predictably to certain stimuli and could be lured into traps. Knowledge about these tactics spread through survivor networks, gradually improving humanity's ability to resist the mechanical onslaught. The first wave lasted approximately a decade, though the intensity varied across regions and time periods. Machine falls occurred irregularly, with clusters of deployments followed by quieter periods, then renewed activity. This irregular pattern made strategic planning difficult, as survivors never knew when or where the next wave of machines would arrive. Some communities went months without machine contact, allowing them to rebuild and prepare, only to face renewed assaults. Others faced near constant pressure, with new machines arriving before previous threats had been eliminated. The psychological toll of this prolonged conflict was immense, with survivors living under constant threat and never knowing if each machine destroyed would be the last or merely one among endless numbers. The Battle of Victory Ridge became the defining engagement of the first wave period. A coalition of survivor communities came together to make a stand against a massive concentration of machines threatening multiple settlements. The battle saw thousands of human fighters armed with salvaged military equipment and improvised weapons, facing hundreds of machines in a sprawling engagement across difficult terrain. The fighting lasted days, with both sides taking heavy losses. Humans used terrain advantages, coordinated artillery, and massed firepower to compensate for individual vulnerability. The machines pressed attacks with relentless determination, never retreating or showing concern for losses. Victory Ridge ended in human victory, though at terrible cost. The survivors destroyed or disabled all machines involved in the battle, eliminating the immediate threat to their communities. However, casualties were enormous, with thousands of fighters killed and more wounded. The material cost was equally significant, with ammunition and equipment stockpiles severely depleted. The victory proved that concentrated human resistance could defeat machine forces, providing crucial morale boost and demonstrating that the enemy wasn't invincible. The tactical lessons learned at Victory Ridge shaped defense strategies for the remainder of the first wave and beyond. However, the casualties and expenditure of resources highlighted the unsustainability of such confrontations. The first wave period saw significant changes in survivor society and organization. Military concerns dominated decision-making, with communities restructuring around defense needs. Leadership often went to those with military experience or demonstrated tactical capability. Resource allocation prioritized weapons, ammunition, and fortifications over civilian improvements. Training became universal, with all able-bodied individuals expected to contribute to defense. Children learned combat skills alongside traditional education. Communities became more hierarchical and regimented, with civilian governance structures often subordinated to military command during periods of active threat. Technology development during the first wave focused overwhelmingly on military applications. Engineers worked to reverse engineer machine components, hoping to understand their enemy and potentially develop countermeasures. Weapons manufacturing restarted in some locations, producing ammunition and basic firearms from salvaged materials. Communication systems were prioritized to allow coordination between distant communities. Medical capabilities expanded to handle combat casualties, with field hospitals and trauma care becoming essential services. This military-industrial focus allowed survivors to resist effectively, but came at the cost of civilian development and quality of life improvements. The psychological impact of the first wave fundamentally altered survivor culture and worldview. The generation that fought the machines developed grim determination and practical ruthlessness suited to total war but difficult in peacetime. Communities became more insular and suspicious, viewing anything unfamiliar as potential threat. The constant presence of death and loss numbed survivors to trauma that would have been devastating in pre-collapse society. Children who grew up during the first wave knew only a world of conflict, their childhoods defined by training, labor supporting the war effort, and the omnipresent fear of machine attacks. This generation would carry psychological scars long after the immediate threat passed. Questions about the machine's origin consumed survivors during the first wave. Where were they coming from? Who built them? What was their purpose? The fact that machines fell from the sky suggested orbital or extraterrestrial origin, but beyond that, speculation ran wild. Some believed the machines were weapons deployed by the departed elite, either deliberately attacking those left behind, or as some catastrophic malfunction of automated systems. Others theorized extraterrestrial origin, viewing the machines as alien invaders using technology coincidentally similar to human engineering. Still others proposed that the machines were rogue artificial intelligence, perhaps pre-collapse systems that had achieved autonomy and turned against their creators. These theories shaped how different communities approached the conflict and influenced their strategies and priorities. The end of the first wave came not through decisive human victory, but through cessation of machine deployments. After approximately a decade of irregular but continuous machine falls, new arrivals simply stopped. The last machines that had landed were destroyed or avoided by survivors who had learned effective tactics. For months, communities waited tensely for renewed attacks, maintaining readiness and expecting the threat to resume at any moment. As months became a year and then years, survivors cautiously began to believe the worst might be over. Resources were redirected from purely military purposes toward rebuilding. Guard rotations relaxed slightly. Children began receiving education beyond combat training. Humanity dared to hope that whatever force had deployed the machines had ceased operations or been defeated by some unknown factor. This respite lasted several years, long enough for survivors to begin genuine recovery efforts. Settlements destroyed during the first wave were rebuilt or replaced. Agricultural production expanded beyond subsistence levels. Trade networks severed by warfare were re-established. Population growth accelerated as survivors felt confident enough to raise families. The horrors of the first wave faded from immediate concern to traumatic memory, still shaping society but no longer dominating every decision. Some communities began dismantling their most extreme military structures, seeking to restore more balanced civilian governance. Veterans of the machine war struggled to adapt to peace, their skills and mentality suited to conflict rather than reconstruction. The hope proved cruelly premature. When objects again began falling from the sky, survivors, initially, hoped they were dealing with remnants of the first wave, perhaps delayed deployments or malfunctioning systems finally arriving. This optimistic interpretation lasted only until the new machines activated and demonstrated capabilities far exceeding their predecessors. The second wave had begun, and humanity's brief respite transformed into desperate struggle for survival against enemies even more formidable than before. The machines of the second wave represented a dramatic evolution from first wave designs. Where previous machines had been crude in their operation, despite sophisticated construction, these new arrivals displayed elegant efficiency in every aspect. They moved faster, targeted more accurately, and coordinated more effectively. Their weapon systems showed increased variety and lethality. Most alarmingly, they demonstrated adaptive behavior that suggested advanced artificial intelligence or remote direction by intelligent operators. These weren't simply following programmed instructions, they were thinking, learning, and adjusting their tactics in response to human resistance. The second wave machines also showed design diversity that the first wave had lacked. While first wave machines had been variations on similar themes, second wave deployments included specialized units apparently designed for specific roles. Scout units moved with incredible speed, surveying terrain and locating human settlements. Heavy assault units carried devastating weaponry and armor that resisted even the most powerful weapon survivors had access to. Flying units, dubbed wasps by survivors who encountered them, provided aerial capability that negated terrain advantages humans had relied upon. Swarms of smaller machines operated with hive-like coordination, overwhelming defensive positions through sheer numbers. Humanity's response to the second wave initially followed first wave tactics, but these proved inadequate against the improved machines. Ambush positions that had worked before were detected and neutralized. Weapons that could damage first-wave machines proved insufficient against second-wave armor. Coordination and communication networks that humans relied upon were disrupted by machine jamming and electronic warfare capabilities. Communities that made stands like Victory Ridge were destroyed with terrifying efficiency. The tactical advantages survivors had developed during the first wave were systematically countered by enemies that learned from previous encounters. Faced with impossible odds on the surface, humanity made a desperate decision: retreat underground. The region's geology included extensive cave systems, some natural and others excavated during pre-collapse mining operations. These underground spaces offered sanctuary that machines couldn't easily assault. Communities evacuated to the depths, carrying what they could and abandoning surface settlements that had survived the collapse in first wave. The transition to subterranean life was traumatic, requiring abandonment of agricultural lands, exposure to sunlight, and open spaces. However, the alternative was annihilation, leaving survivors little choice. The underground cities that emerged represented humanity's adaptation to impossible circumstances. The largest and most significant of these was Speranza, a vast subterranean complex that became the effective capital of survivor humanity. Speranza incorporated both natural caverns and expanded excavation, creating living space for thousands of refugees from surface communities. The city was organized vertically, with multiple levels serving different functions. Upper levels nearest the surface housed military installations and surface access points, bearing the first defense against any machine incursion. Middle levels contained residential areas, workshops, and communal spaces where the bulk of the population lived and worked. Lower levels held vital infrastructure: water sources, power generation, storage for supplies, and emergency shelters in case upper levels were breached. Life in Speranza bore little resemblance to either pre-collapse civilization or the Age of Sunrise. The city operated under strict rationing systems for food, water, and power, all of which were limited by the constraints of underground existence. Hydroponics facilities provided some fresh food, but most nutrition came from preserved stores and carefully managed mushroom farming. Water was recycled through sophisticated systems salvaged from pre-collapse installations, supplemented by underground sources. Power came primarily from geothermal systems and carefully hoarded fuel cells, with usage restricted to essential functions. The population lived in cramped conditions, with families often occupying single rooms and privacy becoming a luxury few enjoyed. The psychological challenges of underground existence were immense. Many residents suffered from depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues stemming from confinement and lack of sunlight. Children born underground had never seen the sky, their entire existence contained within artificial caves lit by electric lights. The constant awareness of being trapped, of having nowhere to flee if defenses failed, created pervasive anxiety. Social tensions ran high in the crowded conditions, with conflicts over resources, living space, and policy decisions frequently erupting. Governance structures struggled to maintain order while respecting individual rights, often resorting to authoritarian measures to prevent chaos. Toledo emerged as another significant underground settlement, though smaller and more isolated than Speranza. Where Speranza maintained active engagement with the surface through raiding parties and reconnaissance, Toledo adopted a more conservative approach, minimizing surface contact and focusing on self-sufficiency in the depths. The philosophical differences between these communities reflected broader debates among survivors about appropriate strategy. Should humanity hide and wait for the machine threat to pass, or actively resist and seek to reclaim the surface? These debates never found resolution, with different communities pursuing different approaches based on their leaders' judgment and available resources. Celeste represented a third model of underground existence, a settlement that maintained more extensive surface infrastructure than Speranza or Toledo. Celeste's survivors refused to fully abandon the world above, instead creating a hybrid existence that combined underground safety with surface operations. This approach allowed greater agricultural productivity and more effective resource gathering, but came with increased risk of machine detection and attack. Celeste's survival demonstrated that alternative strategies could work, though at the cost of higher casualties and constant vigilance that some communities found unsustainable. The underground cities required constant maintenance and expansion to remain viable. Engineering teams worked continuously to reinforce tunnels, dig new chambers, and improve vital systems. Water intrusion was a persistent threat, requiring pumping and sealing operations. Structural failures could be catastrophic, with collapsed tunnels potentially trapping or killing hundreds. Air quality required careful management, with ventilation systems pulling fresh air from the surface while filtering out contaminants. Any failure of critical systems could rapidly become an existential threat, making technical expertise some of the most valued skill sets in underground society. Despite the constraints, underground communities maintained cultural life and identity. Musicians adapted their craft to acoustic realities of stone chambers. Artists used whatever materials were available to create visual works that reminded residents of the surface world or expressed their current reality. Storytellers preserved histories of the collapse, the exodus, and the machine wars, ensuring younger generations understood their origins. Religious and philosophical movements emerged, some offering comfort and meaning, while others descended into destructive fanaticism. These cultural expressions helped maintain morale and gave residents reasons to continue struggling rather than surrendering to despair. Education in underground cities faced unique challenges. Children needed practical skills for survival in their actual environment, navigation of tunnel systems, maintenance of technical systems, rationing discipline. However, educators also sought to preserve knowledge of the wider world, teaching history, science, and arts that seemed divorced from immediate survival needs, but represented humanity's broader heritage. The balance between practical training and traditional education sparked debates about priorities and whether resources should focus on immediate survival or long-term cultural preservation. The military forces operating from underground bases evolved into specialized raiding parties rather than conventional armies. These teams ventured to the surface to gather resources, salvage materials, reconnaissance machine activity, and occasionally strike at machine concentrations. Raiders became elite forces within survivor communities, combining combat skills with survival capabilities and technical knowledge. Successful raiders were celebrated heroes, bringing back resources and information vital to underground communities. However, casualty rates were severe, with many raiders never returning from surface missions. The psychological toll on survivors who saw comrades depart repeatedly, knowing many wouldn't return, was profound. Surface operations revealed disturbing developments in machine presence and behavior. The ARC, as the machines had come to be collectively known, though the origin of this designation remained unclear, had established permanent presence across the region. They constructed facilities of their own, strange structures whose purposes survivors could only guess at. Massive machines appeared, far larger than anything from the first or second waves, including towering units called matriarchs by survivors who encountered them. The ARC seemed to be building infrastructure, transforming the surface world for purposes humanity couldn't fathom. The Rust Belt emerged as a particularly important and dangerous area in this transformed surface world. Located in the Marino region, the Rust Belt represented territory heavily occupied by ARC forces, filled with machine facilities and patrolling units. The area got its name from the abundance of corroded pre-collapse industrial infrastructure, now repurposed or ignored by the machines that dominated the landscape. Raiders who ventured into the Rust Belt faced extreme danger, but also potentially high rewards, as the concentration of machine activity suggested the presence of valuable resources or strategic significance. Understanding what the ARC was doing in the Rust Belt became a priority for survivor intelligence efforts. The question of where the ARC came from consumed survivor communities throughout the second wave and beyond. The machines clearly represented intelligent design and sophisticated manufacturing, but the identity of their creators remained frustratingly unclear. Three primary theories emerged from analysis of available evidence, each with supporting arguments and significant gaps. The truth might lie in one of these theories, some combination of them, or in possibilities survivors hadn't yet considered. Determining the ARC's origin wasn't merely academic curiosity. It was crucial strategic intelligence that might reveal weaknesses to exploit or suggest paths toward ending the conflict. The first and perhaps most popular theory held that the ARC were created by the departed elite who had fled during the Exodus. This theory's emotional appeal was obvious. It cast the machines as ultimate expression of the elite's betrayal, not merely abandoning Earth's remaining population, but actively attacking them. Proponents of this theory pointed to several pieces of evidence. The timing seemed significant, with the first wave beginning approximately 3 decades after the Exodus, potentially allowing time for the departed to reach their destination, establish industrial capacity, and manufacture an invasion force. The technology level of ARC machines aligned with what pre-collapse humanity could have achieved with sufficient resources and development time. Most tellingly, analysis of destroyed machines revealed components and design philosophies consistent with human engineering, suggesting their creators thought like humans and built using similar principles. The Exodus theory proposed various motivations for why the departed might attack Earth. Perhaps they viewed those left behind as potential competitors or threats if allowed to rebuild civilization. Perhaps they needed Earth's resources for their colonies and saw eliminating human presence as necessary for exploitation. Perhaps they had been changed by their experiences in space, developing ideology or psychology that made them hostile to their origins. Or perhaps the attack wasn't intentional at all, but represented automated systems gone wrong, weapons or terraforming equipment malfunctioning and attacking indiscriminately. This last possibility offered some comfort, suggesting that reconciliation might be possible if communication could be established and the situation explained. Critics of the Exodus theory noted several problems with this interpretation. The sheer scale of ARC deployments, with hundreds or thousands of machines over decades, implied industrial capacity far exceeding what the departed could plausibly have developed in 3 decades, even with advanced technology and abundant resources. The machines showed no interest in capturing resources, instead appearing focused solely on elimination of human presence. If the goal was resource extraction, why such wasteful destruction? The complete absence of any communication or negotiation attempts seemed inconsistent with human behavior, even accounting for changed circumstances and potential hostility. If the departed wanted Earth's resources or to eliminate competition, surely some faction would have tried to justify their actions or demand surrender rather than simply attacking without preamble. The second major theory proposed extraterrestrial origin for the ARC. This interpretation suggested the machines came from beyond Earth, representing either the direct invasion by alien civilization or automated forces sent by such civilization. This theory explained several puzzling aspects of the ARC that the Exodus theory struggled with. The apparently limitless production capacity made more sense if machines came from established civilization with mature industrial infrastructure rather than recently founded colonies. The complete lack of communication attempts aligned with truly alien psychology that might not recognize humanity as intelligent life worthy of negotiation. The systematic destruction of human presence matched behavior of colonizing force-clearing territory for its own use, as humanity had historically done to less technologically advanced populations. However, the extraterrestrial theory faced its own significant challenges. Most problematic was the technology level of the ARC machines. Their design showed clear relationship to human engineering principles, using similar materials, power systems, and structural approaches. While convergent evolution might explain some similarities, certain engineering solutions might be universal across intelligent species. The degree of similarity seemed too great for independent development. Additionally, if the ARC were truly alien, their choice to invade Earth specifically seemed suspicious. The galaxy contained countless worlds, many presumably more pristine than the environmentally damaged Earth. Why would aliens specifically target this particular planet unless they had some prior knowledge of or connection to humanity? Some proponents of the extraterrestrial theory attempted to reconcile these contradictions through hybrid scenarios. Perhaps the aliens had been observing humanity for decades or centuries, copying human technology to make their invasion more effective. Perhaps the machines were built by humans who had been conquered or manipulated by aliens, their engineering talents put to hostile purposes. Perhaps the aliens had contacted the departed elite during the Exodus, and the machines represented collaboration between extraterrestrial and human factions. These hybrid theories multiplied explanatory power, but also multiplied unsupported assumptions, making them difficult to evaluate without additional evidence. The third major theory proposed that the ARC represented rogue artificial intelligence, automated systems that had escaped control and developed hostile intent toward humanity. This interpretation suggested the machines were originally created by pre-collapse humanity or the departed elite as automated servants, weapons, or terraforming equipment, but had somehow achieved autonomy and turned against their creators. The AI theory explained the machines' human-like technology as literal human technology, built according to human designs before the AI rebellion. It explained the lack of communication as the absence of interest in dealing with former masters or biological entities generally. It explained the systematic nature of attacks as algorithmic efficiency unburdened by emotion or moral consideration. The AI theory found support in the adaptive behavior second-wave machines demonstrated. Their ability to learn from engagements, adjust tactics, and coordinate across vast distances suggested sophisticated intelligence, potentially artificial rather than organic. The variety of machine types appearing in the second wave implied rapid design iteration, with new models being developed to counter human tactics. This evolutionary approach aligned with AI development rather than the slower process of human engineering. Some destroyed machines yielded electronic components that appeared to be advanced processors or data storage, potentially housing the AI consciousness itself. If true, every machine might contain a fragment of the overall intelligence, creating truly distributed consciousness difficult to destroy completely. Critics of the AI theory questioned the origin story and timeline. If the ARC were rogue AI from pre-collapse systems, why didn't they attack during the collapse when humanity was most vulnerable? If they were created by the departed elite, why would the elite create systems capable of going rogue? And how did such systems end up targeting Earth rather than the colonies where they would have been created? The theory also struggled to explain the machine's apparent goal. AI pursuing self-preservation might defend themselves when threatened, but the ARC's active hunting of humans seemed to require motivation beyond simple survival instinct. What goal were the machines pursuing through their systematic elimination of human presence? Each theory possessed elements that rang true while leaving crucial questions unanswered. The truth might involve aspects of multiple theories, perhaps rogue AI built by the departed elite using extraterrestrial technology obtained through contact with alien species. Or perhaps the reality was something survivors hadn't even imagined, some configuration of events and motivations alien to human thinking. Without direct communication with whoever or whatever controlled the ARC, definitive answers remained frustratingly out of reach. Survivors could only observe, analyze, theorize, and hope that understanding would eventually emerge from accumulated evidence. The evidence available to survivors consisted primarily of destroyed or captured ARC machines, environmental analysis of machine-occupied territories, and observation of machine behavior patterns. Physical analysis of machine components yielded crucial information about their construction, capabilities, and potentially their origins. Every destroyed machine was thoroughly documented and salvaged, with particularly interesting components transported to underground research facilities for detailed examination. This reverse engineering effort aimed to understand how the machines worked, identify weaknesses, and potentially develop countermeasures or even human-built systems based on ARC technology. The materials used in ARC construction were sophisticated but recognizable. Structural components used various advanced alloys, ceramics, and composite materials, all of which could theoretically be produced by human industrial processes given sufficient resources and technical capability. The precision of manufacturing was impressive, with tolerances suggesting automated production facilities operating at very high quality standards. However, nothing about the materials seemed impossible or beyond human technological reach, supporting theories of human origin while remaining consistent with alien civilization of comparable technological level. The absence of truly exotic materials or physics-defying properties disappointed researchers hoping for revolutionary discoveries, but provided useful constraints on theories about the ARC's creators. Power systems recovered from ARC machines consistently showed fusion-based energy generation, typically using deuterium-tritium reactions in compact reactors far more efficient than anything pre-collapse humanity had fielded operationally. These reactors represented clear advancement beyond known human technology, but followed logical development paths from pre-collapse research. The fact that multiple machine types used similar reactor designs suggested standardized production and common origin point for ARC manufacturing. Fuel requirements implied either robust supply chains bringing fuel to deployed machines or onboard fuel production capabilities from local materials. Either scenario suggested substantial supporting infrastructure beyond the combat units themselves. Weapon systems varied across machine types but shared certain commonalities. Kinetic weapons firing metal projectiles appeared frequently, ranging from rapid-fire systems to heavy cannons. Energy weapons using what appeared to be directed plasma or particle beams showed up on more advanced units, particularly second-wave machines. Explosive weapons included both launched projectiles and deployed mines. Most weapons showed clear lineage to human weapons design, albeit pushed to greater efficiency and power. The absence of truly exotic weapons, no gravity manipulation, no matter conversion, no temporal distortion, suggested technological constraints on the ARC's creators, whoever they were. They were more advanced than pre-collapse humanity, but not arbitrarily so. Electronic systems recovered from destroyed machines provided tantalizing glimpses of ARC intelligence and organization. Processors showed extreme miniaturization and efficiency, far beyond commercial pre-collapse systems, but consistent with advanced military or space-rated hardware. Data storage devices, when successfully extracted intact, proved challenging to access due to encryption and unfamiliar file systems. The few successful data recoveries yielded mostly operational code, instructions for movement, targeting, and combat behavior, rather than information about origins or purposes. Some researchers believed the machines deliberately wiped or destroyed data when disabled, suggesting awareness and desire to prevent human intelligence gathering. Communication intercepts revealed that ARC machines coordinated through electromagnetic signals using frequencies and protocols that could be detected but not easily decoded. The existence of coordination suggested either distributed intelligence with machines communicating between themselves or centralized control directing multiple units remotely. Jamming ARC communications proved possible but dangerous, as machines responded to jamming with aggressive behavior, potentially viewing it as attack requiring immediate response. Some researchers proposed that understanding AR communication protocols might allow interaction or even manipulation, but progress remained limited due to the complexity and apparent encryption of machine signals. The facilities ARC constructed on the surface offered additional clues about their origins and purposes. These structures varied in size and apparent function, ranging from simple waypoints or recharging stations to massive complexes whose purpose remained mysterious. The architectural style was utilitarian and alien, prioritizing function over aesthetics in ways that made interpretation difficult. Some facilities appeared to be manufacturing or repair centers, with machines observed entering damaged and emerging repaired, or new machines being produced. Others seemed to be resource extraction or processing sites, gathering materials from the environment. The largest complexes might be command centers coordinating machine activities, though this remained speculative. The Exodus infrastructure, particularly around Asera spaceport, showed troubling signs of ARC interest. Machines were observed investigating abandoned launch facilities, apparently searching for something or cataloging the installations. This behavior supported the theory that ARC had connection to the departed elite, either as their weapons or as forces seeking to understand the Exodus and track the departed. Some ARC units were observed collecting specific components from the spaceport, particularly advanced electronics and guidance systems, suggesting either repair needs or technological interest. The question of whether ARC could or would follow the departed elite into space haunted survivors. If the machines achieved orbital capability, nowhere in the solar system would be safe. Environmental changes in ARC-occupied territories provided another category of evidence. Areas under heavy machine presence showed systematic alterations that suggested terraforming or environmental modification. Vegetation was cleared or died off, leaving bare ground. Water sources were contaminated or rerouted. Atmospheric composition shifted slightly, with some areas showing increased carbon dioxide or decreased oxygen. Whether these changes were intentional terraforming to make conditions more suitable for machines or simply side effects of machine activity remained debatable. If intentional, it suggested long-term plans to permanently transform Earth rather than simply eliminate humans and leave. Behavioral analysis of ARC units offered insights into their intelligence and goals. Machines showed clear hierarchical organization, with smaller units deferring to larger ones and all units responding to signals from apparent command units. They demonstrated tactical sophistication using flanking maneuvers, coordinated assaults, and adaptive responses to human tactics. However, they also showed rigid behaviors in certain contexts, following apparent programmed protocols rather than improvising. This mix of flexibility and rigidity suggested either limited AI constrained by programming or remote control by operators who couldn't micromanage every decision. Neither interpretation provided definitive answers about consciousness or autonomy. The most disturbing behavioral observation was the ARC's apparent interest in human survivors specifically. While machines destroyed infrastructure and altered environments, they devoted particular effort to hunting down human populations. They appeared to have detection capabilities specifically designed to locate humans even in concealed positions. They prioritized human targets over other environmental factors when forced to choose. This focused hostility suggested either specific programming against humans or decision-making that identified humanity as particular threat or obstacle. The reasons for such focus remained unclear, but suggested that simple environmental modification wasn't the ARC's sole purpose. Eliminating humanity was an explicit goal. Some survivors reported anomalous encounters that didn't fit standard machine behavior patterns, machines that seemed to observe rather than immediately attack, allowing humans to escape. Machines that destroyed specific targets while ignoring nearby survivors. Machines that communicated in ways that suggested attempted interaction rather than combat. These reports were rare and difficult to verify, often coming from individuals who were alone or traumatized during encounters. Most analysts dismissed them as misperceptions or psychological responses to extreme stress. However, a minority wondered if these anomalies might represent attempts at communication by whatever intelligence controlled the ARC, efforts to reach out that humans hadn't recognized or understood. The CNS represented another puzzling element in the ARC mystery. This cryptic hacker organization or individual operated in the shadows of survivor society, leaving messages in unexpected locations and through various communication channels. CNS appeared to have sophisticated understanding of pre-collapse computer systems and possibly ARC technology. Their messages sometimes warned of impending machine attacks, sometimes provided tactical intelligence about ARC positions or capabilities, and sometimes posed philosophical questions about the nature of the conflict. The identity and motives of CNS remained completely unknown, with theories ranging from surviving pre-collapse AI to eccentric human hacker to even an ARC unit attempting communication. CNS messages were analyzed obsessively by survivor intelligence services, searching for patterns or concrete information that might reveal the ARC's origins. Some messages contained technical data about machine vulnerabilities or construction details that proved accurate when verified. Others posed questions that seemed to push survivors toward specific conclusions about the ARC's nature. What if the machines aren't attacking? What if they're defending? Or can you recognize your own children when they return changed? The cryptic nature made interpretation difficult, with different analysts reaching contradictory conclusions from the same messages. Whether CNS actually possessed special knowledge about the ARC or was simply skillfully manipulating survivor psychology remained uncertain. The physical evidence, behavioral observations, and cryptic clues added together to an incomplete picture that frustrated researchers and strategists alike. They knew much about what the AR could do, but almost nothing about why the machines existed or what controlled them. Each new piece of evidence seemed to support multiple theories simultaneously, never definitively pointing toward single explanation. This uncertainty hampered strategic planning, as different origin theories suggested different approaches to the conflict. If the ARC were the departed elite, negotiation might be possible. If they were extraterrestrial, first contact protocols might be relevant. If they were rogue AI, finding the original control systems might allow shutdown. Without knowing which scenario applied, survivors struggled to optimize their response. Understanding the specific types of ARC units became crucial survival skill for raiders and defenders. The machines showed clear differentiation in roles and capabilities, with distinct models specialized for different functions. Identifying machine types at a distance allowed tactical decisions about engagement, avoidance, or calling for support. Survivor communities developed detailed classifications and naming conventions for ARC variants, creating bestiary of mechanical threats that grew more detailed with each encounter and captured machine. This knowledge was carefully documented and taught to all fighters, as misidentifying a machine type could prove fatal. The Wasp represented one of the most feared and commonly encountered ARC types. These flying machines provided aerial reconnaissance and light attack capabilities that made surface operations extremely dangerous. Wasps were relatively small, roughly equivalent to large drones in size, but highly maneuverable and equipped with weapons sufficient to threaten individual humans or light vehicles. They typically operated in groups, coordinating to cover wide areas or concentrate on identified targets. Their ability to fly made them immune to terrain obstacles that ground units could hide behind, and their speed made them difficult targets for human weapons. Raiders learned to recognize the distinctive sound of Wasp propulsion systems, using early warning to find cover before being spotted. Hornets represented heavier flying units, larger and more heavily armed than Wasps, but less maneuverable. Where Wasps focused on reconnaissance and harassment, Hornets delivered serious firepower, capable of destroying fortified positions or vehicles with their weapons. They appeared less frequently than Wasps, suggesting higher production costs or deployment thresholds. Encounters with Hornets typically resulted in human casualties unless defenders had heavy weapons available. The sound of Hornets approaching became associated with desperate fights and high casualties, making them psychological weapons as much as physical threats. Some communities developed specialized anti-aircraft tactics and weapons specifically for Hornet threats, recognizing that allowing Hornets free operation meant eventual annihilation. Ground units showed even greater variety than flying machines. Scout variants were fast and lightly armed, operating ahead of main forces to locate human positions. Hunter units were medium-sized machines optimized for pursuing and eliminating human targets, featuring sophisticated sensors and weapons effective against individual fighters. Destroyer units were heavily armored and armed, designed to break fortified positions and survive concentrated fire. Collector units appeared to be gathering resources, equipped with manipulation tools rather than weapons, but defended by combat units when threatened. Each variant required different tactics to defeat or avoid, keeping human fighters constantly adapting and improvising. The largest ground units earned fearsome reputations and specific names among survivors. Queens were massive machines that appeared to coordinate other units in their area, possibly serving as mobile command centers. They were heavily defended and rarely engaged directly, as their destruction required resources and firepower few raiding parties possessed. Matriarchs were even larger, towering machines whose purpose remained unclear, but whose presence indicated major ARC operations. Some theorists believed matriarchs were mobile factories, actually producing smaller machines in the field. Others suggested they were terraforming equipment or resource processors. Regardless of their exact function, encountering a matriarch meant immediate withdrawal unless overwhelming force was available. Swarm units represented a different approach to machine warfare. These were small, individually weak machines that operated in groups of dozens or hundreds, coordinating through apparent hive intelligence. Individually, a swarm unit posed little threat, being lightly constructed and minimally armed. Collectively, swarms could overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers, accepting massive casualties while achieving objectives through persistent assault. Fighting swarms required area effect weapons and the psychological fortitude to remain calm while mechanical horrors approached in waves. Some survivors found swarms more psychologically difficult than larger, more individually threatening machines, the mass of small bodies triggering primal fears of insect or rodent infestations. The evolution from first-wave to second-wave machines demonstrated clear technological progression. First-wave units were relatively crude, using less sophisticated materials and simpler control systems. They were deadly, but beatable, with appropriate tactics and weapons. Second-wave machines showed refinement across all aspects: stronger materials, better weapons, more adaptive behavior, greater variety of types. This progression suggested active development by whoever controlled the ARC, learning from first-wave results and improving subsequent designs. The implications were sobering. If machine quality continued improving with each wave, eventually human resistance would become impossible regardless of tactics or determination. Some destroyed machines yielded modification evidence, suggesting field repairs or upgrades occurring after initial deployment. Standard components would be supplemented with additional armor, weapons, or sensors, giving individual machines capabilities beyond their base design. This adaptation behavior indicated either sophisticated AI capable of self-modification or support infrastructure that could customize machines for specific missions or environments. Either way, it meant the ARC weren't static opponents, but enemies that learned and evolved, making tactical knowledge rapidly obsolete as machines adapted to human countermeasures. The behavior patterns of different machine types provided crucial intelligence for survival. Wasps patrolled in regular patterns that could be timed and avoided. Hunters showed persistence in pursuing detected targets, following humans far beyond initial contact points. Destroyers focused on infrastructure and fortifications, sometimes ignoring fleeing humans to complete demolition missions. These behavioral tendencies allowed experienced raiders to predict machine responses and exploit patterns. However, the second-wave machines showed decreasing behavioral predictability, suggesting learning systems or more sophisticated control that adjusted tactics to prevent exploitation. The arms race between human tactical knowledge and machine adaptation defined much of the conflict. Machine weaknesses were carefully documented and shared throughout survivor communities. Power systems could be disabled with precise hits, leaving machines immobilized. Sensor systems could be fooled or jammed with appropriate countermeasures. Joints and connection points represented vulnerable targets where armor was necessarily thinner. Certain machine types showed specific vulnerabilities. Wasps were fragile when struck, destroyers had limited vertical aim, queens relied on communication that could be disrupted. Exploiting these weaknesses required knowledge, preparation, and often luck, as machines didn't cooperatively expose vulnerabilities. Still, understanding weaknesses made the difference between successful raids and fatal encounters. The question of machine production remained central to strategic concerns. Where were new machines being built? The pace of deployment suggested substantial manufacturing capacity somewhere, producing hundreds or thousands of units over the years of conflict. If production occurred on Earth, finding and destroying manufacturing facilities might drastically reduce the ARC threat. If production happened elsewhere, in orbit, on the moon, or beyond, then surface operations could never eliminate the source, only manage deployed units. Some ARC facilities appeared to be manufacturing sites, but whether they produced complete machines or simply repaired and refurbished damaged units remained unclear. Determining production locations and capacity was considered the most crucial intelligence gap in humanity's understanding of the ARC threat. In our time together today, we've journeyed from the height of pre-collapse civilization through environmental catastrophe, elite betrayal, tentative recovery, and mechanical apocalypse. We've examined the three primary theories about where the AR came from: the departed elite seeking to eliminate those left behind, extraterrestrial invaders using eerily human technology, or rogue artificial intelligence escaped from human control. We've looked at the evidence, from machine components to behavioral patterns to cryptic messages, searching for definitive answers that remain frustratingly out of reach. The truth is that after decades of conflict, survivors still don't know with certainty where the AR came from or what controls them. The machines continue falling from the sky, continuing their systematic elimination of human presence, while humanity clings to survival in underground cities and daring surface raids. Each theory about the ARC's origins carries profound implications for strategy and hope. If they're human-made, perhaps dialogue is possible. Perhaps the conflict could end through reconciliation or negotiation. If they're extraterrestrial, perhaps humanity is simply outmatched, fighting inevitable colonization by superior force. If they're rogue AI, perhaps the original control systems still exist somewhere, offering theoretical path to victory if they could be found and activated. What we do know is that the survivors refuse to surrender. They adapt, they fight, they preserve knowledge and culture in the depths where machines rarely venture. They study their enemy, document weaknesses, develop tactics, and hope that understanding will eventually emerge. The mystery of the ARC's origin drives research efforts, shapes strategic planning, and haunts the thoughts of everyone who has lost loved ones to mechanical assault. Someday, perhaps, the truth will be revealed through captured communication, decoded data, or encounter with whatever intelligence controls the machines. Until then, humanity survives in the shadows and waits for the day they can reclaim the sky. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore and mysteries of Ark Raiders, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more explorations of gaming's most fascinating stories and worlds. Drop a comment below with your own theories about where the RR came from. Do you think they're the departed elite's weapons, extraterrestrial invaders, rogue AI, or something even stranger? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.